All right, everyone, welcome back for our next lecture topic, which is the cardiovascular system. Now, the cardiovascular system is a very, very large system, and it includes some major organs and other parts of the body. The next 3 chapters specifically will be focused upon the cardiovascular system and 3 different major components that make it up. This chapter is going to compose of the blood. We're going to speak about the contents of the blood, what makes it up, and what its functions are. In the next chapter, we'll discuss the heart, as it is the pump for the blood, and that is a major player in the cardiovascular system. And then the following chapter will cover the blood vessels, which contains the blood and works as a channel system for the heart to pump blood through the body and to get blood to all other areas in the body. Out of all of the 11 body systems, the cardiovascular system is one of my absolute favorites, so I'm very excited to go over this material with all of you. So without any further ado, we're going to get into blood and its major roles in the body. So first and foremost, as we discussed in A&P1, blood is actually a type of connective tissue. As a review and a reminder, connective tissue is one of our 4 major types of tissues. And connective tissue can be found made up of an extracellular matrix as well as live cells. Now, most of our connective tissues included some type of gel-like extracellular matrix or very, very hard extracellular matrix and cells that served a particular function for that type of connective tissue. But blood was one of our very unique types of connective tissue, as it is part of a group known as liquid connective tissue. Blood and lymphatic tissue were the 2 types of liquid connective tissue that we would have discussed very, very briefly at the time. But in the coming videos, we're going to talk much, much more about blood, what truly makes up the blood, and what its overall function is going to be for the body. So when we think about blood in terms of it being a connective tissue, I like to always start that way with blood. We want to understand that there is an extracellular matrix, and we will also have live cells. And blood is one type of connective tissue that has a very, very diverse array of different types of cells. We'll see red blood cells, which you can see labeled right here. We'll find our white blood cells, which are listed here. And just for your information, there are many, many different types of white blood cells, and we will discuss quite a few of them. And we'll also find the thrombocytes, also known as platelets, that can be found in the blood. And those are the formed elements that can be found in the blood. However, we also have that non-living extracellular matrix. And if you can remember, extracellular matrix is made up of some type of ground substance as well as fibers. And so even though we have a liquid type of connective tissue, that does not mean that we're going to go against any of the criteria for connective tissue. We will, in fact, have a ground substance as well as fibers. However, with blood, what makes this a liquid type of connective tissue is the fact that the fibers are actually soluble. They're dissolved in the extracellular matrix, which is known as plasma. Now we'll see a bit later on the actual function of these soluble fibers, and we're going to talk extensively about blood plasma, as it serves many, many, many functions to the body overall. But before we start going over all of the individual types of blood cells or all of the functions that plasma is going to serve for the blood, we want to step back and look at blood as an entity and a member of the cardiovascular system. We're going to first go into some of the theory behind blood. We're going to talk about some of its characteristics that it serves the overall body. So your book does a very, very good job of giving blood some very clear and concise characteristics. And they are listed here. Some of these things I'm not going to go over as much, but I do want to mention some of these characteristics and what their importance is. One of the first things that I would like to mention about blood as a whole is that in its entirety, it's almost about 1/10 of our entire body weight, 8% to be specific. We'll see that we can break down this 8% into the formed units as well as the blood plasma, and we can really start to break down what blood is from this number. We'll see that in an average adult male, we contain about 5 to 6 liters of total blood volume, and in females, we'll find about 4 to 5 liters. And this difference can be accounted for in the differences that we will often see in the body sizes between males and females. I'm sure that we have all seen blood. We've all been outside and scraped our knee as we were playing when we were very young, and the reddish color of blood might make some of us rather queasy. However, we are all familiar with the fact that blood is a reddish color. However, the color does tend to change in blood, and this is determined based on how much oxygen is found in our blood. Simply the color of blood gives us an indication about how oxygenated our blood actually is. And we'll come to see very, very shortly that oxygenation levels is one of the major, most important things about blood as a contributor to the human body. We're just about to get into all of the major functions of blood, but the last thing that I really want to mention here is the pH of blood. So the pH of blood is slightly basic. We'll find the pH at 7.4. We'll find that blood is much more viscous than water, which just means that it's much thicker than water. And this thickness can be accounted for in the formed elements, which are the cells that are found floating around in the blood. So these are just some of the gross characteristics of blood. We are going to take a lot of time and elaborate on each of these. But to start off our understanding of what blood is and the functions it's going to carry out, this slide tends to be very helpful in introducing us to this type of connective tissue. So the functions of blood can be described on this slide, and these functions are things that we want to keep in mind throughout the entirety of this presentation. Now, I guess I would be quite biased if I tried to rank each of these functions in their order of importance. Truly, I guess we can't really say that there is an order of importance when it comes to the functions of the type of connective tissue. However, I will go ahead and mention blood's most prominent function first, and that function is transportation. Blood is a transport type of connective tissue, and it's specifically going to transport these substituents listed here: oxygen as well as nutrients, hormones, waste products, and then some. There are so many different things that blood is going to transport throughout our body. So before I even go any further, I'm just going to take a quick second to explain the role of blood and how vital blood is for the cardiovascular system. We discussed in Chapter 25 the necessity of oxygen in terms of our body's metabolism. There's lots of things that our body is going to need in order to sustain its homeostasis, but oxygen is a necessity that cannot be overlooked. One of blood's most important roles is to carry oxygen throughout the body to the body tissues. This way, we can have metabolism taking place in our body cells. This incredible function of blood would not be possible without the interplay between the cardiovascular system as well as the respiratory system. So when we inhale, when we breathe in, air is roughly about 20% oxygen, and most of it is actually nitrogen. But when we breathe in, the oxygen that's found in the air is going to eventually go into the lungs, into these little sacs. And they're going to fill up these sacs, and oxygen is going to diffuse into the bloodstream through a series of very, very thin membranes. And then when that oxygen makes its way into the blood, our red blood cells, specifically the red blood cells, are going to attach themselves to that oxygen. They're going to pick up oxygen from the blood as it's diffusing into the blood, and they're going to allow for the transport of that oxygen throughout the entire cardiovascular system. Now, oxygen is not the only transport product. We'll also have some carbon dioxide being transported, nutrients from the digestive system. This is going to play a major role in getting nutrients to our respective tissues. As we just spent several videos covering the endocrine system, we'll see that blood is also a major player in transporting hormones throughout the body. So once all of these different types of chemicals make their way into the blood, they're going to be able to get pumped by the heart in the blood all the way throughout the body. And whenever blood reaches a particular tissue that's deoxygenated or needs to offload some nutrients or particular hormones at their target cells, blood has a way of doing this whenever it gets to its destination. Blood is also going to be extremely important for taking waste products out of the body, back to locations by which we can eliminate these waste products. Carbon dioxide is one waste product that will often enter the bloodstream and will eventually get released when that blood carrying the carbon dioxide makes it back up to the lungs. We can think of nitrogenous wastes also. Those are going to get eliminated when we get to the kidneys. When blood reaches to the kidneys and gets filtered through the kidneys, those nitrogenous wastes are going to get filtered out and they'll eventually get released. But they only got to the kidneys thanks to the transport capabilities that blood offers the body. So blood transport is an extremely important function of blood, and one that I would say is integral to our overall homeostasis. The second function here we see is the protective function that's offered by blood. The protective function of blood goes a bit beyond the two examples that are listed on this slide. However, I will address each of the examples listed. So first and foremost, the white blood cells that we find in the bloodstream are major players in our body's immune system. There's many different types of white blood cells, and each white blood cell is going to specialize in some type of different way of protecting the body. And because white blood cells transport themselves in the blood, they're going to be also a major player in the immune system as well. Now, another way that blood will often offer our body protection is by preventing its own loss by clotting factors that are found in the blood. Those are things like platelets, also known as thrombocytes. And this is also where we'll see those soluble fibers in the extracellular matrix coming into play. Our third major function of blood is the regulation of the homeostasis of our body. We can look at blood much like a highway. Our body's blood is one of the only ways that nutrients and waste products can get exposed and leave certain body tissues. As our body tissues are rather stationary within the body, it is the blood that's going to be pumping and in the process regulating all of the examples that are shown here. So our body's temperature is going to be majorly regulated by blood flow. The more blood that's flowing through a particular area, the more heat that's taken away with that blood. If a body cell needs more water, nutrients, or oxygen, it's going to primarily rely on the blood to bring those resources to the body cells. So we'll start to elaborate on each of these functions as we go through this presentation, but hopefully this slide gives you a general idea of the overall importance that blood offers to the body and the major tasks that blood is going to carry out for our body's homeostasis. So as mentioned before, blood has a few major components, and we can actually literally see those components separated from each other based on their density when we centrifuge blood. A centrifuge is when we just basically take a test tube of blood, we stick it in and we spin it around really fast to separate out the different parts of blood. And you can see with this test tube that if we were to take a sample of blood and we were to centrifuge that test tube, we would see that the top 55% is made up of blood plasma. So you can see the plasma makes up over half of the blood. You can see that there's a very tiny layer in between known as the buffy coat, and that shows you where the white blood cells are going to be found. And below this, the remaining 45% will include the red blood cells. So this is actually quite fascinating. We can actually see when blood is centrifuged that we have this extracellular matrix known as blood plasma, and we've got the formed elements, which are known as the cells. We've got the white blood cells and we have the red blood cells. So one thing that we can tell from this picture is what's known as the hematocrit. The hematocrit refers to the percentage of total blood volume that's occupied by red blood cells. So you can see with this sample, we took 100% of the blood, we centrifuged it, and we ended up with 45% red blood cells. That means with this example, the hematocrit is 45. For adult males, a normal hematocrit rating is 40 to 54%, and for females, it's normally 38 to 46%. We use the hematocrit often to assess how much of the blood volume is occupied by red blood cells. The higher the hematocrit goes, the more viscous the blood gets, and the lower the hematocrit goes, the less viscous our blood is. I'll again reference the amount of red blood cells when we start talking about anemia and polycythemia. Now, regardless, what we see here is that plasma makes up roughly 55% normally of our total blood volume. This is the liquid portion of the blood, and it's mostly made out of water. However, there are some other solutes that are found in here, such as proteins. This slide will break down the overall weight of blood compared to our total body weight, as well as the different substituents that can be found in the blood, as well as how much of them can normally be found. So first and foremost, we'll see here that blood plasma makes up about 55% of our total blood's volume normally. Of this, most of that is water. However, there are other things that can be found in the blood plasma. Some examples of proteins that we see are the albumins, globulins, and fibrinogens. Albumin's main role is to help maintain osmotic pressure, and they also help in the exchange of fluids across the blood capillary walls. Globulins, on the other hand, tend to be very large proteins and are also referred to as immunoglobulins. Another name for an immunoglobulin is an antibody, and these are molecules that are going to help to attack bacteria and viruses as well as aid in the transport of certain substances in the blood. Fibrinogen, lastly, is going to play a major role in our body's blood clotting cascade, which we'll eventually get to. But these are just some of the proteins that we will find in the blood. In fact, these make up most of the proteins we find in our blood, but they are not all of the proteins that we find. Now, in terms of the other solutes that we'll find, we'll see that we have certain electrolytes, nutrients, gases, and then some. The gases are often referred to as oxygen and carbon dioxide. As we've discussed, oxygen and carbon dioxide are transported in the blood, so naturally those two gases are going to be in the blood for some time while they're being transported. Nutrients, of course, will also come in through the digestive system. They'll get absorbed into our body, and the nutrients that we will have will make their way through the body to get processed eventually at certain sites. Sodium, potassium, and calcium are some examples of electrolytes, and waste products include urea, creatinine, bilirubin, and ammonia. Most of these waste products tend to result as a byproduct of metabolism. So I find that this slide is very, very helpful to keep ourselves organized when discussing the blood. More than half of our blood's volume is made up of blood plasma, which contains these substituents. However, almost half of our blood is also going to be made up of the formed elements, which are the cells. And there are three major groups of formed elements that we will see. The most numerous will be the red blood cells. We'll then have the platelets, and then least common we'll find our white blood cells. The red blood cells are a very specialized cell that has no nucleus and has a very, very unique shape. The major role of the red blood cell is transporting of substances in the blood. Platelets are going to play a very important role in the blood clotting cascade, as well as fibrinogen, so they're going to work together very nicely. And our white blood cells will offer more of an immune protective function for the blood. And you can see some of the white blood cells are listed here also. We have neutrophils, lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils. And each of these white blood cells plays a very unique role in our body's immune response. So I don't expect you to be experts on each of these cells, but you can see neutrophils, lymphocytes, and monocytes are going to be the three most common. In that order, you can see neutrophils are much, much more common than any of the other types of cells, and lymphocytes will be also much more common than any of the remaining types of cells. Monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils are present in much lower concentrations. So I find this slide very, very helpful as we try to organize ourselves and jump into the cardiovascular system. Blood simply has a lot of components that can be found within it. So it's very, very helpful for us to keep in mind what can be found in blood and how much in reference to other parts we will find. So this would be a very, very good slide to make sure that you know for when the test comes around.